Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Julia Berg, she, her. I'm the Director of Education at the Fosswaterway Seaport. So before we begin our presentation today, I want to share with you a photo courtesy of Over Tacoma. And this is our building here in Tacoma, 121 years old this year. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Fosswaterway Seaport acknowledges that our facility is specifically situated on the traditional homeland of the Puyallup tribe of Indians, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Puyallup tribe. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land we are on. We will make intentional efforts to create inclusive and respectful partnerships that honor Indigenous cultures, histories, identities, and socio-political realities. This is adapted from a land acknowledgement provided by the University of Washington. So thank you for that. And now I am so excited to introduce our special guests today, Captain Steve Craig. So he will be joining us live in just a few minutes. If you would like to ask questions, you can do so if you're logged in and watching this on either Facebook or YouTube, and I can display those on the screen for him to answer. If you are watching this recorded, I'd like to welcome all of our recorded viewers, and you can do the same thing. We will check those comments after the program has ended. If you're on YouTube and you're not logged in, you can submit questions by email to education@fosswaterwayseaport.org. And I will go ahead and drop those links for you over in the comments as well. So again, I'm about to welcome Captain Steve Craig, retired U.S. Coast Guard, who is the award-winning author of All Present and Accounted For, which is a book about the 1972 near sinking of the U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Jarvis. It's an amazing, compelling story, very well researched, and we are so glad to be welcoming him here today. So I'm going to go ahead and bring you into the stream. Steve, hi, how are you doing?
Great. How are you doing, Julia?
I am doing wonderful. So he has a presentation to share with us. So I'll go ahead and bring that up and duck out. I will be monitoring the comments. And so please write in your questions as they come, and we will look forward to getting to those at the end. All right, here comes your presentation, Steve, and just say next when you want me to advance the slides. Thanks again so much for joining us.
All right, good afternoon. Again, this is the true story, the grounding, near sinking of the Coast Guard Cutter Jarvis off the coast of Alaska in November 1972, which just November can give you an idea of the weather conditions during that time. Next. A little bit background about myself. You can take a quick look at it. I was a reservist, and I was recalled 14 times during my reserve time. Basically, I have about 8 years of active service. Notable amongst those would be like Hurricane Katrina, where I did 5 trips down to Louisiana. Wife said if there was a 6th trip, I actually could have made a one-way ticket, but because she was left home with 2 teenagers, I can sort of understand. I think she was joking. But I had a variety of different experiences. My background after 2005 was with emergency management. I had a master's degree. Before that, I was postmaster in the small town of Oakville, Washington. And emergency management type jobs. I worked both at the FEMA level, county, state college, state of Washington. And I've written 2 other books, Chronicles of Katrina, which base was on emails I'd sent back during that time. And the wife and I like to travel a lot, and I wrote a book a couple of years ago about traveling over in northern Italy. So that's my background on that. Next.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Can you see at the bottom there, we had a comment come in from Randy who wanted to say hello, retired MSTCS here. Can you see that on the bottom of your screen displayed there?
No, I can't.
Oh, well, he says hello.
Oh, I see. Randy Williams, I see.
That's how the question and answers work. So if you have questions or comments, put those there, and I'll display them for Craig. All right.
Okay, great. These are just a couple articles came out in the last year regarding my book. Long Blue Line is a brand new publication for the Coast Guard, and I was in the first edition of that magazine. And then there was another one put out in the Coast Guard Reservist full-page story about the book. And next. This something just came out a couple days ago down in Centralia, Washington. They published a short narrative on their online Chronicle newspaper, and that just came out a couple days ago. Next. It's just a picture of the Jarvis 378-foot ship. Again, it was a brand new commissioned ship. It's the newest ship in the Coast Guard at the time it went up to Alaska. And next. I've done a couple of these presentations, and one of the comments was that they didn't know exactly what the Coast Guard did. A lot of people thought we just did search and rescue. So I stuck a slide up there of just what some of the Coast Guard duties, responsibilities were, so people can get a better idea of what we do, and also the total number of active duty and reservists and auxiliary personnel that are out there. We're a small service with a lot of jobs. And next. This is a drawing that was completed by a gentleman, I believe, outside Bremerton. He does this for a living. I had him draw up a sketch of the Jarvis just so people can get a better idea of the ship. Notice on there also there is a helicopter on board as well. And next. Captain Woolley was selected, Frederick Woolley was selected as the first commanding officer for the Jarvis. He had extensive background in the Merchant Marine, and he transitioned over to the Coast Guard. One of the main reasons he came over to the Coast Guard was he came home one time, hadn't been gone for about 10 months, and his 6-year-old daughter ran away from him, didn't know who the strange man was. And at that time he decided, well, it's time to be home a little bit more often so his kids would recognize him. He was quite loved by the men. He would stop people in the hallways and just visit with them, ask them how they were doing. So he was stern, but he was fair, and from everything I've seen, everybody loved the guy. Next. The timeline of the Jarvis, again, it was brand new. Pre-commissioning was in Honolulu, 1971. November is the journey. It took them up to Alaska, where they encountered bad weather. On the 11th, on the 14th, winds had kicked up, and eventually it went aground and it tore a hole in the bottom of the ship. They managed to stabilize it, and the next morning they decided they were stabilized enough that they could make it back to Honolulu, and where they then set out from Safe Harbor out into the ocean, open ocean. Next. This is a map giving you an idea of the location of the Jarvis grounding up there in the Aleutian Islands. And next. Again, they were going out toward, they went through Acatan Pass toward the Pacific when they encountered huge waves. The XO was Commander Ken White. He had quite a Navy background. And then later on, he came over to the Coast Guard, and he was commander when he was on board the Jarvis. But he said it was the most tremendous seas he had ever seen, snow, wind, rain, and it tore the patch off the ship. Especially they were hitting 40, 50-foot waves, wind gusts. I talked to one of the crew members yesterday, and he said it was sleet and snow the entire time while they were out there. And at that time, the flooding in the engine room with the patch torn off started to fill up the engine room, and later, shortly thereafter, general quarters was announced where they would lock all the hatch doors, and they sent out a mayday at 7:04 p.m. Requesting help. Okay, next. Ensign Richardson was on board, and he had told me that, or actually he was in a newspaper quoted saying that we were in seas 35, 40 feet high, 70-knot winds, tilting at 35 degrees. At one time they hit a wave. It's pitch black, and of course in those days there was no satellites as far as how you could tell what the weather was, and that was part of the problem. They went out on seas thinking that the ocean had calmed down, and it hadn't. But anyway, go ahead next. Also on board was a helicopter, and one of the issues they were talking about just jettisoning the helicopter right off the ship because they were going to need the deck for landing of supplies. Lieutenant Huddleston was the main pilot, and he went up to the XO to request permission to try to launch and save the helicopter, and also try to save as many men as they could. Initially, the first response was turned down, but as things got worse, and especially when they lost power, then the captain said, okay, you can go ahead and try it. I know one of the decisions, I was talking to a crew member yesterday, his name was David Cost, and he said he was in the room when they were discussing about things were extremely dire, and so they were going to take the 5 youngest guys. They decided to take 5 youngest guys and get them off the ship first, because their feeling was the rest of the crew would not survive, and they felt like the 5 youngest guys still had the most life to live. And he said to be in the room and hear that discussion was sort of unsettling, because you're realizing you're not one of the 5 youngest guys. There's also talk about getting into small boats. Part of the problem with the davits and all that on board that secured the small boats the ship had frozen, so it was tough to get it off. But several of the crew members said they weren't getting in those small boats, especially when you got 40, 50-foot seas. They figured as soon as they got in, they would the small boats would capsize and they would die anyway. So several of them came out right away and said, "No, we're not getting in the small boats." They were going to just stay with the ship. In the meantime, the helicopter was trying to take off, and the first time they attempted it, one of the tie downs wasn't released on time, and the helicopter almost tilted over, and so the pilot called over the crew members who were taking off the tie downs and told them, says, "Look, if you don't do this right, this helicopter is going to potentially fall on the side and not only kill everybody on board the helicopter, but also kill everybody that was out on the deck trying to get the tie downs released." And so next time they released, they all managed to do it at the same time. And next slide. With the next try, the helicopter managed to take off. It sprung up like a spring. They had the rotors going down full blast, which they don't normally do, but because of the situation, ship rocking back and forth, pilots felt like they had to, as soon as the tie downs were released, they had to be going straight up, or else they'd go into the ocean. A couple of guys thought that they saw the helicopter skidding off the ship toward the ocean and then just shot straight up. On a side note, there was 3 of the crew members that were off work, helping get the tie downs off, and one of them admitted to me that they actually had taken bets on whether the helicopter would actually take off or crash. Just a little side bet they had going. Next. While making that turn, the Jarvis experienced a 60-degree roll that would have capsized most ships. I talked to Dave Cost, the crew member, the other day, and he has a son who's, I believe, getting ready to make captain in the Coast Guard. He actually has 3 kids that are all doing quite well in the Coast Guard, but the one is very experienced at mathematics, quite good at it, and I believe he said they actually had the academy. They showed that the ship had actually gone like a 61-degree roll, and at 65 degrees, it definitely would have capsized. George Fuel, who lives outside Ogden, Utah, I was talking to him about this, and he remembers walking on the bulkhead and during that time. You say you have to realize that when it hit that wave, it hit the wrong angle. He said it was pitch black out there. They couldn't see nothing. So they didn't see the wave when they were turning, and that was part of the problem. Again, up in Alaska in November, no, it's freezing weather and bad weather. It's also extremely dark most of the day. I lived up in Anchorage for a couple of years, and I just remember the sun barely creeping up at 10 o'clock and then going back down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It never went overhead. It was just a little bit over the horizon. And these were some of the conditions they were working in. Next. This is the actual helicopter that took off. I found it, Google's a wonderful thing, and I found it in a museum in Pennsylvania. So the director there sent me a couple pictures. He said they're getting ready to redo the paint job on it. But I thought it was interesting. I actually found it. Next. This is the environment up in Alaska. Again, talking to people, it's like 0 degrees outside and the water temperature is 28 degrees. No heat in the ship, especially they got 13 feet of water in the engine room. They actually had to shut down the engines and eventually the generators went out. Absolutely no heat throughout the ship. Driving snow, winds gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Again, time of the year is November, so very little daylight, not to mention freezing temperature. One of the problems they had, there's very little winter gear on board. Understand that this ship was home port in Honolulu, so people, unless their job was outside, the crew members that worked inside the ship didn't have any winter gear. Hypothermia obviously was a primary concern, and he had 50, 60-foot waves. I was told that if you watch the Perfect Storm movie, you can get an idea of the wave action and the ship going up and then, going down into the canyons of the waves, slamming into the water. And I was told that's sort of a good example of what they went through. The engine room, because of extremely loud, people had to be yelling to be heard. They had the P250 water pumps going. Those are very loud. You also have the outside wave action hitting the ship and the wind, loud wind. Snow and rain on the outside decks made walking extremely hard. They actually had to take a rope, a line, and string it along the hallways so that you could go from one end of the ship to the other if you had to go through it inside, because it was with the ship going up and down, it was impossible to walk without grabbing onto a line. One crew member said one thing that with the storm action going on outside, you had the creaking sound of the steel ship going on, just the ship being strained with the steel. Again, 13 feet of water up in the engine room. One of the concerns was potentially getting electrocuted, and so that's why they strung lights with extension cords so people could see in the engine room. Question, what drew me to tell this story was that back in 1973, I was a 19-year-old kid stationed over at base Honolulu, and I ran across one of the crew members that had been on the ship. This was about 6 months after the ship had got back, and they were telling me this story. I was just fascinated, because I hadn't heard anything about it, and a lot of people have, the feedback I got is a lot of people didn't know the story of Jarvis and how bad a situation it was. And part of the reason why a lot of people didn't know nobody knew the full story. You talk to different crew members on board the ship, they only knew their part of the story. Because when the ship finally didn't make it to Honolulu, a lot of them had been on the ship for 2-3 years, and they were due for transfer anyway. So the ship obviously went in dry dock for repairs. Everybody went their own separate ways. There was no sit-down, lesson-learned meeting. The closest thing to that was the board of investigation that was conducted shortly thereafter. One of the crew members mentioned to me also that he remembers seeing in the mess deck, which was below the flight deck, and he's seeing that the water was halfway up the porthole window, how low the ship was riding in the water. He also
question too.
Yeah.
I've been in seas not quite that big, but up to 40 feet. And when you come up those waves and then you drop off the other side, it's like being on a roller coaster, but it never stops. You come down and your stomach goes up into your head, and it's nauseating to say the least. There must have been some reports of seasickness as well in this heavy weather, or were these guys pretty seasoned by this point?
No, a lot of them, this was their first trip ever on a ship. They were young guys. there was reports that a few of them were seen, in the corner of their rooms crying. I didn't see a reason to put that in the book, but you have to say a lot of these people, the 18, 19, 20-year-old guys, and again, this was like their first voyage up to Alaska and first time on a ship. And I think even the experienced guys, one guy said, one crew member said the other day that I talked to that everybody he knew thought they were going to die. They just felt like it. I talked to another crew member who he was sitting in the corner of the bridge. He said, I was sort of feeling sorry for myself, and this other pay officer went over there and grabbed him, put him to work, and told him, get off your butt and do something, because he kind of realized you have to keep busy, or else your mind's going to be thinking all the worst possible things that could go wrong.
Yeah, the mental toll that kind of weather takes on people, especially, when you start to think you're going to die and you start looking at those lifeboats, and then you realize, like you're saying, that the lifeboats probably aren't your best bet.
I was on
never step down into the lifeboat. Anyway.
Yeah. I was on the buoy tender plane tree over in Hawaii when it was over there next, and it was moored right next to the Jarvis. But I was on there for a couple months. But I was a 19-year-old kid from Eastern Oregon. I didn't have a clue about storms, and we went over to the Big Island, and we hit a storm over there. And it was nighttime, and me being young and stupid, I was curious about what a storm looked like. So I went outside, closed the hatch in time to see this wave come down crashing on me. And it swept my legs actually over the side, and I grabbed on the rail and pulled myself back onto the ship, and then went inside the hatch where a chief greeted me and gave me his opinion about what I'd done, which I didn't need anybody telling me at that time. But I didn't know waves could be that. You hear about it, but you don't know how big a wave actually is. But I remember seeing the front of the ship disappear, and that scared the hell out of me. I could have been a trivia question for decades, like whatever happened to Seaman Craig.
Oh, no. Well, we're glad you're still here to tell us about your story. All right.
Yeah.
I'll let you go on.
All right. Yeah, this was the engine room now as the water was starting to come up. Again, eventually got 13 feet, and it just shut. The ship was just drifting in the sea there because of all the water in the engine room. You have to understand also this water is, it's not just clean water. You have oil in the water. You have some asbestos floating in the water. All kinds of chemicals where it was in the water. All right, next. The ship, they estimated that the ship was about 30 minutes away from being crushed by the shoreline rocks. It was heading toward Akatan Island. Excuse me. And there was a Japanese trawler that was responded to the Mayday, and they radioed back to the Jarvis that we could be there in 45 minutes, which is like the officers there said, well, that's too late. We're going to be breaking up on the shoreline there if you don't get it there any faster. So they hauled, but to get there on time. Meantime, the Jarvis did a bunch of maneuvers to slow down the ship so that they would be saved by the trawler. And the trawler managed to get there on time. But again, you had 30, 40-foot waves, and they had to get the tow rope between the two ships. And at that, it took some experienced people. Jack Hunter was one of those that shot the tow line, and he had to get on his knees to shoot it because he couldn't stand up because of the conditions, being being rocked back and forth. He couldn't do it standing up. But one guy, crew member, told me it was amazing. The pilot on board, the master on board the Japanese trawler, had been a tow expert to get that close without crashing into the Jarvis, so they could tow it to safety. See, as Randy Williams said, he was on the Boutwell, 1979. Yeah, interesting. Okay, next. Here's a picture of Akatan Island. Give you an idea of the shoreline there. The other side of Akutan Island is the Trident Seafoods. And I guess they process, was it 1,000,000 pounds of fish a day or something? It's just a phenomenal number. But it's on the other side of the island. And practically impossible to get there from this side. Next. And we talked about the recovery. Okay. Thanksgiving dinner was right around the corner. And so they were, by the meantime, they had to, they didn't have any plates or any way to wash dishes, so they were using paper plates. And one of the pay officers had mentioned they would finish eating on their paper plates and lick them clean and then pass them to the next guy. I know some people thought, that's not, exactly kosher, but, you do what you have to do in desperate times. And it was just an interesting story they were saying about that. Next. There's several comments about the water in the engine room was like elephant snot. One guy said it was like an elephant stuck their trunk in the engine room and blew his nose. They would go in there when they got to Dutch Harbor. They had to obviously drain the water out and then clean the engines. And the guys would go in there and work the time. And by the time they got it done, they would come out and they're just covered top to bottom in oil, just between the insulation and the oil and the grease and all that. It was, and he said it's quite itchy too. And next. Just some amusing stories. There was, when they came into Honolulu Harbor, the captain had commented they were going to tow the ship in, and he said, "No, we made it this far. We can make it all the way." And that was the general feeling of the crew. There's, we saved the ship, and we can make it to the pier there. And there's two non-rates who are they worked for Chief Stanswick, who's he's still alive, living in Florida. Interesting gentleman to talk to. But they worked for him, and they were going to put a pilot on board to help steer the ship into the harbor. And these two non-rates volunteered to escort him to the bridge. And Chief was telling me, he says, at first he said, "Yeah, go ahead and do it." And then he got thinking, wait a minute, these guys don't volunteer for nothing. So he went to the area where the pilot was getting on board, and the two non-rates reportedly had a hold of the guy, and they were getting ready to throw him over the side into the water. And Chief Stanswick advised them of the errors of their way, and so they escorted him to the bridge like they were required to do. Next. It's just pictures of the propellers that were damaged in the grounding. Again, the ship captain had been up for a couple days when they were seeking safe shelter from the first storm, and it started dragging anchor. And by the time the captain got back to the bridge, the ship had hit a rocky bottom that had torn a hole in the bottom of the ship and damaged propellers. And there's a couple of the pictures. All right, next. It was later transferred to the Bangladesh Navy. Sadandra Joy, I believe, is something like Samandra Joy. So this is a picture of it being transferred. Brent Mason asked, "Does surviving experience like that cause any trepidation in getting back out on the water?" Some it did. I talked to one crew member who actually said he got PTSD from it, and he just has a deep fear of the water. He won't go anywhere near the water. And I talked to him just this last week. A few of the others served on several other ships. One of the main so-called heroes on it was Michael Arch, who was the diver on board the Jarvis that dove in the water. He had to dive in the engine room and pull all the rags and stuff. They were plugging up the hoses, stuff getting sucked into the pump. So he was diving in and out 10, 12 times, destroyed his diving suit with all the chemicals in the water. But he later on went on to be a professional diver throughout the world. there's some other people too as well that stayed in the maritime business and continued. A couple of them still sail today. And next. Here's some more pictures. The bottom left there is some of the crew members having a reunion at Captain Woolley's house. Captain Woolley is sitting in the chair there. He retired right after this event, went back home. I thought maybe he would keep, with his maritime background, he would stay with that type of work. But surprisingly, when I talked to his daughter, and he became a farmer. I didn't know anything about it, but all the neighbors helped him learn the business. And it was a few years after the incident, these former crew members went over to his house. Two of them are twins. I think you can tell which two of those are. But so that was interesting. There's some other ships of the Jarvis. Dan Edwards says, thanks for telling our story. Dan was one of the crew members. He gave me a good amount of information, and I appreciate what he gave me. Next. And this is the end of the PowerPoint. This has book information. If you want an autographed copy, you can either go to my website listed there or just send me an email to get a copy. It's got Amazon. It's up to 113 reviews to date. 84% of them are 5-star. I think one of the surprising things, there's a couple of reviews that it's obvious when you look at the reviews, they never read the book. I guess you always have those trolls out there that like to put their inputs in there, but it was obvious with the comments that this person had never read the book. A couple of them had nothing to do with reading the book. One person complained about the shipping, and another wrote that I should have wrote about a different subject. Whatever. So that's the book right there. I guess that's about it. Right, Julia?
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much for that. If anyone has any other questions that they were waiting for the end to ask, go ahead and type those in and I'll share those with Steve. I went ahead and put the link to his book so that you can go online and purchase that through Amazon. And I'm also going to copy over the link to Steve's website so that you can take a look at that. Here we go. Here comes another question. Let me go ahead and post the website. And here is a question for you, Steve. Can you see that there?
Yeah, because you feel like they are left out of most conversations. Well, we're the smallest service, but we're in the news every day. You look at search and rescue or other type of events. I think it's one of the things people are surprised. We had forces over there during the Gulf War and also Vietnam service. So we got, again, one of the first slides where I put down the duties, responsibilities. It's like that buoy tender that I was on. We go out there, you pull these buoys out of the water, and you scrape them, and you put them back in. So we're in charge of aids of navigation. I like to emphasize, before anybody buys the book, just read the reviews on Amazon. I think you'd be quite impressed with the comments I've gotten. Facebook alone, some of the Coast Guard sites, I probably had 200 to 300 positive comments about the book. So I appreciated all that.
Yeah, I was very impressed with the reviews. I noticed one person said that was a former crew member that from reading the book and attending your presentation, that person learned more about the boat that they served on in the Coast Guard than they ever knew before. So by all accounts, it's a very well-researched and compelling book. So we are, and it's an interesting point about a lot of people, right, don't realize something, that the Coast Guard is part of the military. So thank you all of our Coast Guard members for your service. We have a few more things rolling in here, people saying thank you. And again, this presentation is going to be available on Facebook and our previous live presentations, and then also on our YouTube channel. So you can share this link if you would like to share this with somebody. please do go buy Steve's book and read it. We love to support our local authors. Buoy critters, yum, coming in from Randy. And I think that is it for us for now. So thank you so much for joining us today. And you can look forward to these lunchtime series are going to continue near the beginning of the month until we can resume doing our speaker series in person, hopefully in June. So thank you to everybody who joined us live today. Thank you for all of your questions, and another from Randy. Thank you for your participation. And again, if you're watching the record version, you can still comment and we will check those as time goes by and do our best to answer your questions. So thank you so much, Steve.
Well, thank you.
All of our viewers, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye. Talk to you soon.